Hey there, Alex Kidman here, and today I'm taking a look at a rather exceptional phone. This is the Nokia G22. Here in Australia, it's a $349 mid-range budgety kind of Android phone, and you might think, well, that's not so exceptional. What's so new and funky about this? Well, what's new and funky about this is that Nokia, or to be strictly accurate, HMD Global, the people who have the rights to the Nokia name for smartphones, have developed the Nokia G22 to be a self-repairable phone. That is, this is a phone that they say, yeah, you can do some repairs yourself. We'll sell you the parts through iFixit. We'll show you how to do it. And you won't necessarily void your warranty in doing that. More on that a little bit later. But let's have a look at the phone itself first, because whilst being repairable is great and laudable and nice and green, you're going to want a decent phone out of it, right? So at $349, you've still got to temper your expectations. This is not a high-end phone. Here in Australia, the Nokia G22 is available in either Meteor Grey, which is what I've got here, or Lagoon Blue. Both are basically just colours that run alongside the plastic casing which forms the back and sides of the phone. Now that casing itself is also a replaceable part, so theoretically down the track, if you decided you were a bit over Meteor Grey, you could switch over to Lagoon Blue, although, weirdly, iFixit doesn't call them those colours, it just calls them dark black or dark blue. Yeah, it's the same thing anyway. In terms of the screen, the G22 is built around a 6.52-inch HD Plus IPS display, so that's a 720 by 1200 pixel display. It's not super impressive in that regard at this price point. That's kind of a bit low spec, although you do get up to 90 Hz refresh rates, which is pleasing to see. It's still not across the board in this price space. Again, you can do slightly better. Controls run up the right-hand side. You've got your standard volume controls and a combination power button and fingerprint sensor reader. Not my favourite way to do that, but it tends to work for the most part. Again, more on that shortly. One feature that you do get that I do like, that you still don't see on enough phones, is a proper 3.5mm headphone jack. Look, I'm not sure when we all signed up to the idea that really expensive phones won't have this feature and lots of really cheap phones will, but here we are. If you want a wired headphone jack, this has got one. I also have to give HMD some plaudits for the general recyclability of the phone. So the back case itself is made from recycled plastic. It comes in a very plain brown box with instructions on recycling. All of this is really good, really laudable stuff for phones that should be greener, because really we should be looking at that whole life cycle of a phone, and that's partially what the G22 is all about. I also like the fact that they do supply a very simple case, because one of the easiest ways to stop yourself having to do those repairs in the first place is by protecting your phone, even for lower cost phones like this. Yeah, it's a simple case, but that's fine. Sometimes that's all you need. In the hand, this feels fine. It doesn't feel particularly premium, and the one thing that's maybe a little bit missing here is that Nokia feel, that feel that you're getting a premium designed thing that so many Nokia phones actually do have. I feel it's a little bit missing here. Maybe it's to do with the recycled plastic, but this just feels like more of an average phone than a specifically really Nokia phone, beyond the logo on the back, of course. What about the camera? Well, on the rear, you might get a bit excited because there's 3 lenses here, but you've got to temper your expectations, both at this price point, but also because of what HMD Global has put into this particular phone. So what you get is a primary 50 megapixel lens, and you'll shoot almost everything with this. And I say that because the other 2 lenses are a 2 megapixel depth sensor. You don't shoot with that, it just provides depth information, and a 2 megapixel macro, and like everyone else's macro, it's pretty ordinary at best. You're going to struggle to get particularly pleasing shots. At the front, there's an 8 megapixel selfie camera, and again, that feels just a little bit under spec at this price point. It's not awful, but it could be better. And the reality here is that's the story of using the camera here too, because it not only kind of just struggled within its own capabilities, it also struggled to fire up the camera app an awful lot during my testing. Often, I'd just be met with a black screen instead of the actual viewfinder, and I'd have to reset and start the camera up again, and then it'd come good, but of course, I might have missed the shot by then. This could be better, and again, yes, look, $349 phone, it's never going to challenge an iPhone or anything like that. I'm well aware of that, and I've tested so many mid-range phones now, but this is below average on that score. What about performance? Well, the G22 runs on a Unisoc T606 processor with just 4 gig of RAM and 128 gig of onboard storage. At least the model sold here in Australia does that. It is expandable by a microSD, which I do always like to see, but that's still a very middling kind of recipe that leads to middling kind of performance. This doesn't benchmark particularly well, and it's just not particularly fast to use. Now, if your needs are moderate, that's maybe not such a big concern, but again, I just can't help but feel you can do a little bit better at this price point in terms of overall performance. And there's also a few other little bugbears that I've got with the performance story here. For a start, HMD Global used to just provide phones with really, really clean Android on them. You basically just got your Google apps and not much else, and that meant you could configure them as you liked. That's not the story with the G22, which comes with a whole slew of pre-installed apps. And look, they run a bit of a mix. A lot of people are going to want Netflix, for example, pre-installed on the phone. That's not necessarily going to be a problem to them. But things like ExpressVPN or Booking.com's app, yeah, I'm not so sure there. And frankly, I'd rather have the space and make my own choices, HMD. I'm sure money changed hands here, as it usually does, but I'm just not a big fan of having to delete these apps whenever I set up a phone. There's also the question of updates, and again, I've got to look at HMD's recent history, because one of the things that they used to do really well was say, look, we've got a phone, but we are going to provide years and years and years of updates for it. Technically, that's true for this particular phone, because they say they'll provide 2 years of updates, which is not great. I suspect that's down to that T606 processor. But the real challenge here is that's 2 years starting from Android 12. Android 14 is due out this year, which means basically by next year, this thing's not necessarily going to see any updates at all. And there, I think they could and should do a bit better. On the battery front, this was really quite pleasing. It packs a 5,050 milliamp hour battery into its casing, replaceable, or repairable, of course. We'll get to that shortly. And they promise up to 3 days of battery life. Can you get 3 days? Well, maybe. As always, it depends on what you're using the phone for. But in my own tests, 2 days is more average, based on how I use the phone anyway. And just using, for example, a simple video streaming test for an hour, so it only dropped 3%. That's quite pleasing, actually, for a phone in this price bracket. Although, of course, yeah, again, not a particularly fast processor, not a particularly high-res screen, so perhaps not that surprising. But if you want longer-term battery endurance, yeah, there's a good story to tell here. In terms of charging, it's up to 20 watts only. There's no charger in the box. And again, you can take your choice as to whether or not it's a green step or one that's slightly annoying because you've then got to get a charger. But either way, charging speeds are kind of moderate. It will take you a little bit of time to get this back up and running if you do run out of power. But of course, the real story of the Nokia G22 is meant to be its repairability, because the idea here is that because they've partnered up with iFixit, you end users, you or me, should be able to repair this particular phone. Now, for the purposes of review, HMD Global's PR reps here in Australia did provide me with the phone and one of iFixit repair kits. They didn't provide me with any spares or, a hammer to smash it so that I'd have to, which is actually okay, because that would be really super wasteful. But in order to try and test this out, I thought, well, I'll pull it apart, take the battery out and put the battery back in. Or at least that's what I plan to do, and you can probably see what's coming here. So I started levering the back casing off carefully, using iFixit's guide, going slowly. Now, I've pulled plenty of tech gadgets apart before in my life. One of my first jobs was, in fact, working as a PC repair technician. So I'm au fait with the innards of technology, including smartphones. But as I was working my way around the casing, which is kind of stiff to get off, the casing decided, actually, no, I'm just going to go ping and fly across the room. Literally fly across the room, which it's not meant to do. And the reason it's not meant to do, and fair play to iFixit, they do note, don't take the back casing off, and believe me, I wasn't trying to. It will tear, or it's likely to tear, as it did in my case, the cable that connects the fingerprint sensor. And the good news here is that that's the only thing it damaged. All that's happened to this phone now is it just doesn't think it has a fingerprint sensor at all, because it doesn't have that connection in play anymore. The rest of the phone still works fine. It's not great that that happened, but I am willing to chalk it up to being an accident. What it really highlights, though, is that while this is a self-repairable phone, you may not want to go down that path. The good news here, I suppose, as well, is that because this is a phone for which guides and parts are readily available relative to other phones in an official basis, repair shops and so on should actually be able to do that a little cheaper. It should be a little easier for them to do, as long as they don't come a clanger like I did. So what do I think of the Nokia G22? Look, it'd be really easy for me to complain about that broken fingerprint sensor cable and to say, oh, look, the repairability is too hard. It's too much work for the everyday person. But while that's certainly not a plus, and I think HMD Global might want to look at how they design these repairable phones in the future based around that, I can't really say that that's an absolute minus. Looking around, there's plenty of other YouTube guides, there's plenty of other people who have managed to do that exact battery swap I was planning to do without hitch, although pretty much all of them will say, yeah, hey, look, this is relatively hard work. Even iFixit says this is moderate difficulty work. It's not a simple task. This is not like those older phones that just had a simple plastic back where you just went, click, popped it off, there was a battery there, you pulled it out and you put a new one in. Not quite that. There's quite a few steps involved. There's quite a bit of time. But I do like the repairability aspect of this phone because I do like the idea that we should all use our phones till they die. Make sure that we are just repairing things that can be repaired rather than sending them to landfill. All of that is a huge plus, and potentially financially, environmentally, it's good across the board, generally speaking. However, my bigger problem with the G22 is it's just not that compelling a phone. I really wish that Nokia had done something with a repairable phone in a nicer phone, in something that you'd probably want to keep for more and more and more years, because right now in 2023, this is a slow phone. This isn't a particularly compelling phone. It's not one that's going to see Android updates that are newer than this year's update, even though it claims 2 years worth of updates. And as such, I have this horrible feeling that people who buy this are potentially in a couple of years' time, when some accident befalls their phone, they're going to look at it and go, oh, it's a bit slow and a bit clunky, and I can probably get something that's just newer and fresher and everything works at that point, at which point it's heading to landfill anyway. If Nokia had produced an even nicer phone, I think there'd be less impetus to do that, even if it was a little bit more expensive. So the concept is really good. I love the idea, and I love the push towards a more renewable, recyclable, repairable economy for smartphones. That's the great thing about the G22. I just wish the G22 was a bit greater. Anyway, that's my take on the Nokia G22. Got any thoughts? Want to call me a klutz in the comments? Have at it. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.